What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe
and Amy
Review. It's our weekly show where we review the magic stories as they're posted on Wizards' website. This week we had Return to Dominaria, Episode 11 by Martha Wells. The, so that I can use the word, penultimate story for Return to Dominaria for this set of Dominaria. And my quick review at the top is, it was good. Read it. There's not much more. We'll get into the in-depth portion of it, but it was good. Go read the story, come back here, give us your opinions, hear our opinions, etc. But we're not gonna, as we always say, we review, we don't summarize, so it's better for you to go read the story first and then come back here. It may be somewhat time consuming, but it's worth it. It's a really good story.
Yes.
And we haven't said that in a while, so
yes,
be aware of that when you're making that decision as well. So right. Yeah, but onto the full review itself. It was good. I mean, we had what I hoped 2 weeks ago's story was going to be, or really what I hoped last week's story was going to be.
We had what I had hoped all of the stories would be, but that's fine.
Yeah, there were still some questionable decisions made or whatever.
Yeah, there were definitely some parts where, as we were going through it, I was making some critiques, like some comments being like, oh, that was kind of stupid, or why would they say that, or, something like that.
Yeah, me too.
But that's kind of nitpicky, I think, for the story overall. I don't know how important it is to go over that stuff in this episode. I think overall the story was good.
I was just going to say, I think we can talk about that in the weeks to come. Like I said, barring there are going to be other stories coming up after Dominaria stories are done, but I'm assuming there will be some break of some kind. I could be wrong, but if there is some break, we are planning on doing the Magic Story podcast reviews and for Dominaria, and so if and when we do those, that's when we can talk about, as we've talked about for weeks, kind of more of the broader meta-type discussions, because those are necessary, and we'll get there. But for this particular story, you had some cool moments. You had kind of little moments with almost everybody, right? There weren't really many Tiana moments. There was like one Arvad moment, but you had a couple of Raph moments, a couple of Shauna moments, a lot of Joyra, Liliana, Gideon, Teferi, Karn, Chandra. You had Slimefoot. You had everybody
legit happening.
Yeah, you had everybody given some time and some point to characterize. So I liked that. I appreciated the split. The split towards the end, or about halfway through, was done so well, with Gideon, Chandra, Teferi, and Karn going off, with Chandra and Gideon disguising themselves to get into the stronghold, and everyone else being on the Weatherlight, and going basically to allow Liliana to raise the dead in the section during the fight on Urborg with all the Panther Warriors and things like that. And so I loved how they did that split, though, because the story basically started with, just a bunch of different people talking and meeting up or whatever on the Weatherlight, and then it got to Gideon and Chandra's group, Liliana and Joyra's group, and that was where the split happened, and it jumped back and forth between them. And at first you're like, okay, that makes sense. They're two different groups, so we're going to see them at different points, but it was done so well because it established, hey, this is what we're going to be doing. There's two groups. We're going to be jumping back and forth between them.
Yeah.
And then when the Weatherlight crew runs into Yargle, and Yargle attacks the Weatherlight, then they cut to Gideon and Chandra. And it's like, oh, so good. You already established that you're doing that. So it's not out of nowhere where it's like, oh, cliffhanger. It's like, no, they've been doing this all along. And by they, I mean Martha and her assistants through the R&D creative team or whatever. But they've been doing those cuts all along, and now it's just another cut. But it's a cut right at that moment where you're like, but but I want to know what happens.
Right.
And that's very good of them to have cut that there, because it turns out that is the last time that we see that group in this story. We cut to Chandra and Gideon, and they are who close out the story by once again leaving us on a cliffhanger with those two, where Chandra ends up having to push Gideon into the fighting pit in front of Bells and Locke and now Whisper, who got introduced in the story. And so, I don't know, I thought that was such a cool moment of like, we're going to establish that we do these cuts back and forth between these two groups, and then we're going to snatch, information away from you and just leave you wanting more, which was, I mean, I loved it. I loved that so much.
And that's why my statement to work off of that would be, this story was the best story so far for Dominaria. And I think this is really the first story where we kind of see Martha kind of find her groove with writing these stories, which is unfortunate because it's the second to last story, and supposedly she won't be writing the next set of stories.
Nope.
So it kind of sucks that it took this long for her to find the sweet spot for the storytelling that needed to occur all along.
Right.
It's great that she found it, and so it's great that this story is good, and that really just means the next story will be good, I think. It's just a shame that now she can't take that further and into another plane or another set or whatever.
Right. And yeah, I don't know. And okay, so while we continue to gush about things, let's talk about Yargle. Because last week, I thought it was hilarious when people were like, oh, Yargle's in the story, when I saw it online today, and I was like, ugh. Literally last week, in our video last week, I said, if, hopefully next week we're getting into the meat of the story, unless they need to throw a Yargle story in there for some reason. And then I find out that Yargle's going to be in this one. Yargle is the image that you see like representing the story on their website, on Wizard's website. And I looked and I was like, don't do this to us. Don't give us another week of pandery bullcrap.
Yeah.
And they didn't.
Yeah.
They didn't do that at all.
Yeah, when I found out Yargle was in this story, I was furious. I was like, oh my god, the world is just becoming this gigantic ball of meta BS, and I don't even want to deal with it. I just I don't want to have to read this story and do another review where all I do is criticize.
Yeah.
And I can't say anything good about the story.
Yeah.
And so I was not looking forward to this story at all. And that being said, I feel great about it now because this is the best story yet.
Yes.
And
Agreed.
and not just that, but it really takes it up a notch. I would say the other stories were down here and this one was up here. So it's not oh, well, it's better. It's a lot better.
Yeah. And I would say,
and they still found a way to incorporate Yargle without making it about Yargle and without taking away from what they were actually trying to achieve in the story, which is the climax of the story.
because when the hell else are you going to do it?
Yeah.
You've only got this week and next week. But yeah, I literally wrote on my notes here, that is how you handle a fan favorite. That's how you handle a character that everyone wants to hear about. They even gave the information, and I mean, in the art for Yargle, right, they have scale humans, if you will, or scale soldiers, kind of at the bottom there. But I was not aware of the fact that, and they mentioned that,
was so gigantic,
that his head is half the size of the entire Weatherlight. That's crazy.
Yeah. That's
awesome, but that's crazy to me. So all of that combined means that Yargle, in my opinion, based on the stories alone, infinitely better than Slimefoot. I'm sorry. Look at our review.
Just the stories.
How they were presented.
The
how they were presented in the stories.
Right. That is correct.
And where they were presented in the stories.
Yes.
How and where, Yargle, 100% better than Slimefoot. Slimefoot who? Right? Yargle was great. They gave an entire story to Slimefoot last week and shoehorned it in there, it felt like.
Right.
But Yargle, so well done and so much more memorable.
Right, and more meaningful.
Right, than last week's mess. Now, speaking of last week and speaking of Slimefoot, we did have a Slimefoot moment in this story where Slimefoot in Urborg is like, goes over to the edge of the ship, leans over the edge, is like drawn there, and talks. Slimefoot doesn't really talk, but have like communicated in some way with the denizens under the Weatherlight in the Urborg ground, which from the denizens saying, oh, there are bits of Yavimaya here, where are you from, that's where you're from, that leads me to believe that Yargle is talking to sapperlings, right? They live in
Slimefoot.
What did I say, Yargle?
Yeah.
Sorry, yes. Mixing them up in my head. Yes, Slimefoot, thank you, is talking to some sapperlings, is my opinion. That's what it seemed like. I don't know if that's the case. It could be that Slimefoot is able to speak with spirits, and they are just spirits, because some of them did give their names. There was like a cacophony of names when Slimefoot was talking to them. So...
And do you remember what any of the names were? Like, did they sound like spirit names, or did they sound like... In fact, one of them sounded like a Yargle-esque name, or Yarkul, which was what... Or Yarkul, which was what the general who became Yargle was when Belzenlock turned him into a maggot. It sounded similar. It was not exactly the same, but it sounded similar. So I don't know if that means that Yargle is, or Slimefoot is communicating with spirits or not. I'm not sure. I assumed it was sapperlings. If Yavimaya is, or part of Yavimaya is present there, it could be like corrupted sapperlings. From the, the game's perspective, the sapperling deck is black-green, and Urborg is like the main black-themed section of Dominaria. So that's what leads me to believe that. If you know, let us know in the comments down below. If you have a different opinion, let us know as well, as always, because maybe you'll educate us. Yes. I don't pretend to know everything. That's for damn sure. And if I get stuff wrong, I'm very willing to admit that and correct my statements. Okay. So let's actually talk about the restaurant.
Well, right. So
I feel like we're on a tangent now.
There was that one moment of there were certain moments of Liliana characterization.
Yes.
We've been on a theme of talking about that because it's supposed to be something that's running through all of these stories, and for the most part they do a little snippet here and there. I think in this one they gave us maybe a snippet and a half, if you will, because they had that moment of Liliana being worried about Chandra and Gideon, and she says it, but with sarcasm in her voice. And then, since we're hearing from Gideon's perspective, Gideon knows that she is actually worried and just hiding it under her sarcasm, which makes sense.
Which is good. That's good Gideon characterization, as well as being partially Liliana characterization, because it's letting the audience know what Liliana's thinking, but at the same time, it's allowing us to see that Gideon's finally realizing enough about Liliana.
And so it leads me to a question, though, because at the start of this story, there were a lot of interactive moments between Joira, Liliana, and Gideon, right? The three of them together were talking a bit at the beginning, and Liliana is making her typical Liliana snide, sarcastic comments in response to things that Joira is saying. And Gideon is like giving her dirty looks every once in a while or whatever. And Joira seems to not be reacting to Liliana's nonsense because, as we are told, Joira has been around Liliana enough to know that she does that.
Yeah.
Now, I have read...
Although I feel like it took until this story for Gideon to figure it out.
Well, but here's my point. I've heard mixed opinions on this, but it's something that we have said many times, and so I want to continue saying it, but I want to give you guys the opportunity, if you think that we're being unfair in requesting it, that you can sound off on it. I think that's another example of we were being told, not shown. Because what other opportunities besides basically when they first met have we even had Liliana JaAR interactions for us to understand that JaAR gets Liliana's BS by now? We don't. And so all that we know is that the story told us. JaAR knows Liliana's BS by now. Man, would have been real cool to see it though. Why haven't we seen any of that?
That I don't care about as much. I don't know. I think that's really a prime example of how the timeline seems hinky. Because remember at the beginning when we were like, hey, wait a minute. The timeline's all messed up because Jace was on Ixalan for like ever. And then he just all of a sudden shows up and everybody, it's like no time has passed.
Right.
And so like, I don't know. I feel like this is another time where they're kind of like, well, they're old best buds now because they've been spending lots of time on the Weatherlight together. And it's like, not really, though.
Yeah.
Unless you expect us to just assume that a lot of time has passed and there's really no indication of that other than these random statements that we can kind of conclude that from, maybe.
So that was my point in bringing it up, was like, is it fair for us to say, why didn't you show us this? Why are you only telling it to us? Or...
Well, because they had to give a whole story to Slimefoot, because that was super important.
But I've heard the critique I've heard of why show don't tell doesn't always work is because you don't want everything shown. Sometimes you tell things to get it out of the way because it's something that you want to be brought up, but you don't want it to be focused on for a long period of time, or if that makes sense.
Well, the other thing is too, if it's a characterization thing, and it's something that you want the audience to know, but it's not something that you want the characters to know, then it's something you tell, not show. Because if we're the two characters in the story and you know, I'm Liliana and you're Gideon, and Gideon understands that Liliana actually really cares about him, but Liliana's not actually showing that, then it makes sense to tell the audience, hey, you know, Gideon knows that Liliana cares about him, even though Liliana's not showing it, because if we showed it, then it would be against the characterization.
Well, right, and it would also be a way of, you would kind of be dumbing down your characters that way.
Right.
Because it would be a way of saying that, like, if all the information that we're being presented with is solely dialogue and not going inside their heads to listen to their thoughts, then it means that we, as the reader, have the exact same information as the other characters present. And so if we, as the readers, are able to go, wow, it's pretty obvious that he loves her, right, or cares about her, and yet she's not getting it, then it makes her look stupid.
And that's why things that are written as a play, where everything is just dialogue back and forth pretty much, typically has a narrator, so that the audience can find out information that the characters either don't know or just wouldn't say. Right,
or a moment for a character to, like, step out right towards the edge of the stage. Everybody freezes behind them and they get to kind of just monologue a bit. And so the people behind it, again, for plays at least, right? So it's clear that the characters behind them are frozen. So that's your way of getting into that character's mind without them outwardly saying, am I in love right now? You know, in front of everyone who would care about
because you don't just walk through life and say, oh my God, I just fell in love.
Right.
And everyone around you goes, okay, dude.
Yeah. Ew.
Never mind. I'll go find somebody else to hang out with.
Yeah. So that was one of the questions that was raised for me in this one was, this was blatantly told, not shown, but is that bad? Is that okay? Because it's not necessarily super important. I mean, JaAR is not a planeswalker. Mm-hmm. So after next week's story, we are likely not going to see her for quite some time, and possibly never again see her interacting with Liliana.
Right.
It's likely that it'll happen at some point, but it will likely be years down the road. And so if that's the case, is it really that important that JaAR gets Liliana's BS? And by is it important, I mean, is it important for us to have had a significant amount of time spent on it? Because if not, then this was handled very correctly. And if so, then yeah, maybe there are some questions there of like, hey, maybe you should have done this a little bit differently. But that's why I asked the question. I kind of lean more towards it being okay that it was told, not shown, but I noticed it, and so I wanted to at least bring it up for the discussion. Okay. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was a seed. I want to plant a seed. I want to let it grow, and I want maybe some opinions on it if you guys want to give them, if you have them. Otherwise, we'll talk about them when we do the Magic Story podcast. But I was a little bit, I questioned a bit, and I think you did too, partially in the story, Gideon's characterization. To a degree. And I think that I struggle with it because recently, in recent weeks, a lot of people, ourselves included, have been questioning characterization choices of a lot of the Gatewatch. And I think a lot of people have been chalking it up to a couple of things. Martha Wells being a new writer for these stories, and so not fully understanding the past characterization of these characters, the Gatewatch characters, and or the old school Dominaria favorites. But, since we're talking about Gatewatch specifically, there's also an issue of where is the quality control on the Wizards side of things, on the R&D narrative side of things, preventing these kinds of things from happening. Right. Because, as we will get to with the Magic Story podcasts, those go so much further in depth than we would ever think to go. We're not those Vorthos, and there are plenty of them out there, and we greatly enjoy reading and watching the content that those Vorthos put out, but we are so focused on the individual stories and how they play up into the larger world of Magic Stories that we're not the ones who are going to be focusing on the full geography of the plane, for example, and whether that continuity keeps from one story to the next and with the novels and stuff, because we don't have that kind of time nor that kind of expertise. Right. But we enjoy...
that's just one of the things that's not super important to us about it all.
Yes, yet we enjoy hearing those kinds of things, right? Yeah. We're not going to go out of our way to be like, we need to memorize this because if it comes up again, we need to know.
Right, but if somebody leaves a comment referencing that information and talking about how it actually relates to the story or relates to our comments on the story, to kind of get us a little bit closer to actually understanding what it was we didn't understand, then that's great. That's definitely something we want to hear all about. But
and with Gideon, I mean, again, maybe I'm just hyper-focused on it now after the Liliana issues, the Chandra issues, the Jace issues that we were hearing about and dealing with for the last few weeks. But even last week, and I'll shout out where shout-outs are appropriate, Vorthos J on Twitter had pointed out, and or in an article that he wrote, a blog post or something, he had mentioned that Gideon last week in the story seemed off. Because there was a moment where Slimefoot walks up to a room and Gideon and Teferi are in there, and Gideon and they kind of look and they're like, what the hell is that? And Teferi's like, oh look, it's a Thallid. And Gideon's like, that's weird. But that seems like someone else's problem. And goes back to polishing his sword again. Since when have you ever known Gideon to think that it's someone else's problem?
Right.
And again, I'm not the first person to talk about it. That's why I mentioned Vorthos J, but that's an example from last week. For this week, Gideon was the one in Battle for Zendikar in Kaladesh, or on Kaladesh, who was throwing orders around left and right. You go this way, you go this way, you do that. And these are people that he just met.
Yeah.
Now I get right? He's a visitor on a new plane, and you've got Teferi and Karn and Jaya Ballard there, who are established planeswalkers on the plane.
Yeah.
So
Gideon, he's much less of an alpha in that situation, I guess.
But he's still, as far as I know, maybe I'm not aware of some backstory here, but as far as I know, he's still the only one with a leadership, like, military general background.
Yeah.
And so why was he not the one seemingly fully coordinating this event? And if he was...
Or at least more than he was, because he really just seemed to be, like, kind of randomly thrown in.
And often kind of making plans with Chandra on the fly.
Yeah.
Or deferring
and that
to...
stuff's just not his style.
Yeah, it's a little dissimilar to me. And so dealing with all of that, it made me question greatly. I was like, what is happening with Gideon? Because I felt like there were a lot of opportunities for Gideon and Chandra to have had actual conversations with one another. And I feel like it was Chandra saying something and Gideon just, like, nodding. For, like, a lot of this story.
Yeah.
And the thing that I find interesting is, it's something that I go back to, and it's just a theory. But the thing that I go back to is the original Magic Story podcast that Doug Beyer did with Martha Wells, as well as Vorthos J's interview with Martha Wells that we ourselves did a JaAR episode on a while back. And it leads me to talk about the fact, or think about the fact that she mentioned, she being Martha Wells, she mentioned that she enjoyed writing blue characters. She enjoyed writing red characters. Liliana is the only, like, mono-black aligned character that she has had to write for so far, at least super prominently. But Liliana is throughout the story. So presumably she got a lot of direction in that regard, since this is Liliana's main story, as we've said like a million times.
That's a good argument, I guess.
But with Gideon, he is the only, as far as I can think of it off the top of my head, he is the only mono-white character that she has to write for, and it's possible that she's just been avoiding it. Because if she doesn't know the characterization well enough, and the tropes that go into white mana aligned planeswalkers enough, then maybe that's why. Now, looking at dual colored planeswalkers, in terms of white, you've got, or not planeswalkers, sorry, characters. You've got Tiana, who is white-red. You've got Arvad, who's white-black. You've got Wrath, who's white-blue. And you've got Shauna, who is white-green. All of these characters, all of these Weatherlight crew members are somewhat white-aligned.
Yeah.
And yet, with everyone but Shauna... Well, sorry, Shauna and Arvad, I guess, are the two colors that she didn't mention offhand that she liked writing, but at least with Tiana, she said she likes red, and with Raph, she said she likes blue, so those could be explained away that way. And then with Arvad, Arvad's a new character. Technically, all of the characters that I just mentioned as dual-colored are new characters. So... there is no characterization to look back to.
Right.
So, again, like I said, this is a seed that I want to plant. I want to talk about it more. And I want to hear your opinions on it, because I feel like Gideon's characterization has been a little bit off.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, it's like a snowball effect, where, like, it's a little bit and you're like, whatever, it's a little weird, but I'm going to leave it alone.
Right.
And then it gets a little bit bigger and you're like, it's a little weird, but I'm still not going to talk about it. And eventually it's just this, like, last week... it was that one big example, right, of Gideon just being like, somebody else's problem.
Right.
It's like, really though, Gideon? You? Someone else's problem? And then this week, I feel like he just didn't get to talk at all.
Right.
Yet, despite the fact that they were putting together this big, like, multi-angled plan that he has done in the past on other planes with other people that he has known for less time, I feel like, than he's known the Weatherlight crew and their members. It just seems odd to me that he would not have a more prevalent role. He's just partnered up with Chandra and ready to go.
Right.
And it seems so odd. Yeah, it just seems weird to me. So I wanted to bring it up. What do you guys think? Let us know in the comments down below. Talk to us on Facebook and Twitter. Those links are down in the description box below. Probably should have mentioned at the top of the video, but go ahead. I'm sorry. Please. Please.
I have more to say.
Go ahead.
Is that the end of the video?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was going to... Yes. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'll say in contrast to that...
Yes.
That... what I liked about Gideon's character in this particular story only was the fact that they're kind of, because him and Chandra are going through this to try and accomplish something. I thought it was cool that, you know, what he had done back on Amonkhet, where, you know, he got through all of the obstacles on Amonkhet, basically, and...
For the trials to get the cartouches.
Right, and so this is much more of like a breeze almost for him, and it's sort of similar, so I kind of really liked that, like, to be able to see sort of the prep for this was Amonkhet, and see that, hopefully... from now until they fight Nicol Bolas, things will be not super hard and deadly. I don't know.
Well, we have to, I mean, obviously, again, we're from what we've heard in this story, we're leading to next week being Gideon tries to get the Black Blade, he tries to use it to kill Belzenlach now, and Liliana is hoping that her army can break through and get into Belzenlach as well so that she can be a part of it, but it seems odd because the whole plan hinders on Gideon gets the Black Blade and uses it against Belzenlach to kill Belzenlach, and yet the story spotlight of Settle the Score has Liliana using her magic on Belzenlach, so I don't know. I don't know.
Well, I assume it's not just going to be one thing. You know, it's not going to be like, oh, Belzenlach, nice to meet you. Stab, you're dead.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, there's going to be more to it.
Yeah. Oh, a quick question, and maybe we'll find out next week. Why was Karn with that group?
Yeah.
What was Karn's purpose in being there? I know why Teferi was there.
It didn't seem like he had one.
Hopefully
we'll find out next week.
Does he just not like being on the Weatherlight? Like, did they just not have anything else for him to do? Or was Gideon actually planning it all in the background like I suspected, but we didn't get told or shown that? And he brought Karn and Teferi along to say, by the way, you guys are both planeswalkers, you should come with us. And that's the only reason why Karn came along, was just so that he could also ask Karn to be like, hey buddy, you know, come on, help us out. Nicol Bolas needs some killing. You know, so I don't know. I don't know. I thought it was a little odd that he was kind of tossed in there. Mm-hmm. That was, yeah. Just let us know your opinions on any and all of those things. Like I said, I'm sorry that I cut you off earlier. So,
no, it's all
so
right.
yes, talk to us on Facebook and Twitter. Those links are down in the description box below. You can leave a comment down below as well. That would be helpful. And I should have mentioned it up at the top, but if you got all the way through and you still want to read this story and you haven't yet, the link to the story is down in the description box below.
Yeah,
Forgot to mention that.
sorry
Sorry.
about that.
But it is there. It is going to be there as long as we can remember from now on. So please feel free to do that. And thank you. Thank you for joining us here on this episode of JaAR as we, and hopefully soon you, show off our...
Hashtag Vorthos Pride.
Very good. We got one more left after this week, guys. One more.
Yeah.
So once again, thank you guys so much for watching. Feel free to... I didn't have to talk about any of the planeswalkers that would have had me talking funny. But that video will pop up, and you can feel free to watch our Fiancé Finance Bundle Battle and see
You mean
who...
Nissa?
No, I don't mean Nissa, despite the fact that she's better than a Johnny as a planeswalker. That video will be up
Or
here.
a Johnny?
Who's not as good as Nissa. I do mean that. Yeah. Yeah, no, feel free to check that out when it pops up there. You can subscribe by clicking up here. Thank you guys so much for watching another episode of JaAR here on Geek for All. I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, guys, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.